Good morning. No matter how many times I practice this in my room or go over my sermon in my living room, I still get nervous when I'm up here. But I've invited God in to help me do this because I care so much about delivering His message and His word, and I just want to get it right, and I don't want to make any mistakes. So we are in the book of Luke again, and we are talking about the prodigal son or the lost son. Everything that Jesus does, there's a reason for it. And in the 4th chapter of Luke, Jesus begins to reveal to the people in the synagogue why he's here. When he came to the village of Nazareth, his boyhood home, he went as usual to the synagogue on Saturday and stood up and read the scriptures. The book of Isaiah, the prophet, was handed to him, and he opened it to the place where it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has appointed me to preach good news to the poor, and has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, and to announce that captives shall be released, and the blind shall see, that the downtrodden shall be freed from their oppressors, and that God is ready to give blessings to all who come to him." He closed the book and handed it back to the attendant and sat down, while everyone in the synagogue gazed at him intently. Then he added, "The scriptures came true today." When Jesus read that from the book of Isaiah, that was written almost 750 years ago, that this day was coming. And as we're going to learn throughout this parable, God is true to his word. God never changes. He is unchanging. So in Luke chapter 15, the prodigal son, which by definition is a person who spends money in a reckless or extravagant way. In AA, we turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. From that point on, God is trying to teach us something. That's what I tell all the men that I work with, that when we turn our will and our life over, God is now in charge. And when things aren't going our way, instead of getting angry or resentment, maybe we stop and we pause and we ask ourselves, what is God trying to teach me? In Luke 15, even though it's titled The Lost or Prodigal Son, the parable shows more of a restoration of a believer back into fellowship with the Father. It shows more graciousness of the Father, and that overshadows the sinful nature of the Son. The Father's great compassion for the Son portrays God's response to anyone who repents. So we'll pick this up in verse 12. When the younger told his father, "I want my share of their estate now instead of waiting until you die," his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. You know, at times we all have a foolish desire to be independent for the wrong reasons. This is a story of my life. I was afforded the opportunity to go to college. My parents were going to pay for it, but I had other ideas. I wanted that money. I wanted to get a job. I wanted to do something else. I wanted separation. This separation often leads to dissatisfaction and disappointment. Sin will always take more than it gives. Sin will take you further than you want to go. Sin will leave you worse off than you were before. And this is exactly what happens to the son. In verse 12, he's ready to be on his own. He's got all the answers. He's got everything figured out. And by verse 14, the money is gone. He has squandered everything. That tells me that it happened quickly. The friends are gone, and he began to starve. In verse 14, about the time his money was gone, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to give him a job to feed his pigs. The boy became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding to the swine looked good to him, and no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired men have enough food and some to spare." the son begins to reflect on his position. He begins to look back. You know what? Maybe it wasn't so bad. Maybe I didn't know everything that I thought that I knew. I had 3 stints in the Salvation Army ARC to get over alcohol and drug addiction. And 2 times I felt I was ready to leave, that I had all the answers, that I was set. And soon after I left and went on my own, separated myself from God, I often found myself sitting thinking, what had I done? He realizes that apart from the Father, there is no hope. The sin had promised more than it had given. It had taken him further than he wanted to go, and he was much worse off than he was before, as was my story. Each time I separated myself from God in the church and tried to do it on my own, I always ended up in a worse predicament than when I started. So the son returns home to the father, and the father runs out to meet him, and the relationship is restored. In verse 21, his son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and you, and am not worthy of being called your son." In the book of John, chapter 1, verse 9, the apostle John tells us, "But if we confess our sins to him, he can be depended on to forgive us and to cleanse us from every wrong." The father is so filled with joy that his son has come home. The father dresses him in the finest robe. He puts a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. He kills the fattened calf, and the celebration begins. And this portrays God's response to anyone who repents. Each time I separated myself from God, went my own way, started making my own decision, God celebrated in my return. There was a party in heaven. God didn't ask me any questions. There were no lectures. Now, my earthly father, on the other hand, there was some accountability for Mr. Greg Nolan. Where have you been? What have you done? Where is that car that I bought you? Well, Dad, I'm going to take the fifth on that. But my heavenly Father does not ask those questions. I almost want to say that he doesn't care. God is waiting for those of us who have strayed in our walk of faith. It's not about the money. It's not about where I was. He's just so happy that I'm back. In verses 25 to 30, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard dance music coming from the house. And he asked one of the servants, what was going on? Your brother is back, he was told. And your father has killed the calf we were fattening and has prepared a great feast to celebrate his coming home unharmed. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, in these years that I've worked hard for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to do. And in all that time, you never even gave me one young goat to feast on with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after spending your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the finest calf that we have. I'll be honest with you. The first time I read that, I was kind of on the older brother's side of things. Wait a minute. He's doing everything right. He's doing what he's supposed to do. Why didn't his father throw a party for him and acknowledge all the good deeds that he had done? He hadn't been rewarded for his actions or his deeds. But then I realized that the older brother's focus was on himself. Why hadn't I received? That part I understand, because as an alcoholic, We are selfish and self-centered to the core. It is all about me. Why don't I have the things that my brother has? Why don't I get to go to the places that my sister went? It is no wonder that I initially agreed with the older brother. I too would have allowed anger to take root in my heart and been unable to show any compassion for anybody, especially my brother. I would have chosen the suffering and the isolation rather than compassion for the brother in his return, rather the restoration that he comes back to the family. He is even unable to forgive the perceived sin of his father against him. The older brother failed to understand the grace of God, and he couldn't comprehend the meaning of forgiveness. That is what alienated him from God. We can do all the right things. We can do everything that's asked of us. But if we don't have compassion, if we don't love one another, if we are not able to forgive each other, the father had many, many reasons to be upset with both of his sons' behavior. The son, the younger son, for asking for his inheritance early is like saying, I wish you were dead. And then when the father throws a feast and a celebration upon his return, that is the older son's responsibility. And when he says to his father, this son of yours, does not even acknowledge as being his brother. Back in these times, family was everything. Your roots, who your father was held very high. And to insult your father in these ways, the laws that I've read about the times, these sons could have been killed for their actions. How many of us think that we have the right to be angry? That person said this to me. This person took what was not his. It was mine. He took it from me. And we feel that we are justified. But the message here from the Father, like God, that it doesn't matter. God forgives us. He loves us so much, he doesn't care. He just wants us back. The older son, he doesn't show forgiveness. The Father's love, God's love is unwavering. And that is such good news. That when we separate ourselves from God because we think that we have all the answers, that it's okay. He's waiting for us. He is waiting for us with open arms, with the fattened calf, with the robe and the ring and the sandals, and he welcomes us home. Even today, when I separate myself, when I'm doing things that I'm not supposed to be doing or thinking things, and I take my inventory at night, I know that God forgives me. And that there is a rejoicing in heaven and he is celebrating my return. I love that. I love that. We're told of this, so the prophet Malachi reminds us of this in chapter 3, verse 6. For I am the Lord, I do not change. God is the same as he was when he created the heavens and the earth. He's the same today, and he'll be the same tomorrow. When little man is all grown up, and he's got a family of his own, God's going to be the same. My friend Danny Smith is in heaven. We went to his funeral this week. He was a soldier here. And I bet he's acknowledging everything that I say as he's looking down upon us today. I miss my friend Danny. But he's in heaven with God. He's in the presence of the Lord this morning. And I take comfort in that. It fills my heart with joy that my friend is in heaven with God. And he knows now that all these promises are true. Isn't that great news that our God is unchanging? Are you ready to experience our Father's grace? To experience his compassion? Our mercy seat is always open. We invite you to come down and tell God that you love him and that you want that relationship with him and that you are so happy every time that he welcomes you home with a party, with a celebration. God isn't going to point out your mistakes. Our Father wants us back. He has been waiting. He's going to have a celebration when we come back to him. God desires our restoration more than anything. The whole reason that he created us was for us to worship him. And he knows that we are human and we're going to make mistakes. But what joy it gives me to know that he's going to be standing, waiting, looking like the Father, waiting for him to come home. And when he sees us, he's coming for us. If you have separated yourself from God, if you have been lured away by the promises of sin, then he is waiting. Come to our mercy seat.